Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Going Electric, the Driver's View, brought to you by Transport Focus and London Travel Watch. My name is Jeff Halliwell. I'm the chair of Transport Focus. We're the statutory independent consumer watchdog for Britain's transport users, and we aim to be consumer-focused, evidence-based, and useful. It's a great time to be having this debate. The health crisis will hopefully pass, but the climate crisis will not pass and will be with us for many years. And we know that decarbonisation of home heating and transport are the two major areas which must be addressed in order to deliver the UK's legal obligation to net zero 2050. And we know that some parts of the UK, for example, Scotland and Greater Manchester, amongst others, have committed to more aggressive targets than 2050. Home and space heating is more complex, but to tackle the transport issue, it's clear that electric vehicles have a major, if not the major role to play. And if anybody else saw this morning's article in the FT on the difficulties faced by the use of hydrogen for road vehicles, well, that's a case in point. So we have the government's commitment to banning sales of internal combustion engines by 2030 and hybrids by 2035. We have the current consultation by the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles on consumer experience of public charge points. We will hear from OZEV, amongst others, including Minister Rachel Mclean, during our event today. Transport Focus and London Travel Watch believe that it's crucial that the consumer view is heard in these debates. I'll now hand over to Anthony Smith, Transport Focus and London Travel Watch Chief Executive, to chair today's proceedings. I hope it's useful, as it will help frame what the consumer view is now and in the future, and how it should be heard loud and clear in the debate. Anthony.
Jeff, thank you. And good morning, everybody. There's quite a few of you out there. It's great to see so many of you here today. I'm Anthony Smith, Chief Executive of Transport Focus. We've got an absolutely stellar lineup of panel members here today. A lot of the people who are going to make this happen in Britain on the journey towards 2030 in the United Kingdom. So it's very exciting. We're going to spend a little bit of time just setting the scene. And as you would expect from Transport Focus and London Travel Watch, we have been talking to the users, because they are the most important person in this debate. So first up, we're just going to hear a little bit from the punters about electric vehicles. Thank you.
I often find it's the anxiety of my passengers that I'm more anxious about. Because they're new, especially if they're new to electric cars. Range anxiety, it's a psychological thing. It's about being sensible first when it comes to actually picking the right car and whether it is for you, and then when it comes to the journeys that you do.
I think the longer journeys, there probably would be a bit of anxiety there, I think. Yeah, I think there would be, if I'm truthful. I think there would be some anxiety.
And I do find myself doing a lot more maths when I'm driving than I ever used to.
I'm disabled, I walk with crutches, and all that put me off was the worry of what happens should it run out.
I mean, I suffer from anxiety anyway when it comes to travelling, so I don't think I'd want to be adding the whole, when I get there, where do I charge?
The concept of having to stop and plug in and have a coffee and all these nice things, to be honest, I really don't want, because I want to go from A to B in as quick a time as possible.
So for 80 or 90% of our journeys, the range would be fine. The problem is, if you want to try and become a one car per family, it just doesn't, it wouldn't fly, because for those longer trips, what would we do?
With making a purchase like this, you can really be kind of creating a more eco-friendly environment and planet for your kids to grow up in.
I drive a car 7 days a week. It's a petrol car. Just thinking about future generations and the damage that's doing.
I'm not what you'd call an activist or anything like that, but if there's a line which is better from that point of view as opposed to worse, then I'll always take the better one.
The one thing that puts off a lot of people, and me included, was the purchase price. You know, I come from quite a working class background, and putting even 10, 15k down on a car is just unheard of, let alone 25, 30.
I definitely get the impression that it works out cheaper overall. And obviously the biggest difference in cost is going to be petrol versus charging.
If people better understood the total cost of ownership as opposed to the upfront costs, then they might be more receptive to the electric car.
Brilliant. Thank you. That was great to hear it and direct from the users there. Some really interesting comments about greenness, about the fact people like electric cars, the cost, the fear, perhaps rather than the range anxiety. And as also you would expect from Transport Focus and London Travel Watch, we've been doing some research. And just very briefly, I'm going to ask Guy Dangerfield, my colleague, and Emma Gibson from London Travel Watch, just to introduce what we've found so far. And Guy, are you with us?
I am indeed. Thank you, Anthony.
Good.
I wanted to pick out a few of the key points from that research. And what I'm about to say will be in a short document that you can download at the end of today's event. Interestingly, we found a high awareness that new petrol and diesel cars won't be available after 2030. 7 in 10 of the 1,300 people we asked knew that. And people broadly trust that the transition will happen smoothly, even though they aren't quite sure how it will happen. Amongst those who haven't yet made the switch, there are 3 principal barriers, and you'll have heard some of those. It's how far you can go on that single charge, that range anxiety, or however one wants to describe it, whether there are enough charging points, and the upfront cost compared with an equivalent petrol or diesel car. And amongst those who've already gone electric, the key points were, well, they love electric cars. But on a long journey, you do have to plan where to stop and recharge. Too often, people are finding charging points aren't working properly. And then there are frustrations around needing to have a particular app for a particular charging point and not always being quite sure how much you're paying for the electricity. So that's a brief summary, Anthony. Back to you.
Thank you. Emma.
Hi. So from a London perspective, there's no doubt that EVs are going to be a really important part of the solution to decarbonisation of transport. And in London, we've already got over 400 electric buses. Electric vans for deliveries and tradespeople are also going to be really important. But in a very built-up city like London, there will be limitations when it comes to charging private EVs. In outer London, where public transport isn't so good and there's a higher degree of car ownership, the idea of charging up in your driveway or on the street is more realistic. But in inner London, many people live in flats. Lots of people are renting. And so it's more difficult to install a charging point for private EVs. And access to the curb and the pavement is hotly contested and in very, very high demand. You've got buses, bikes, cars, delivery vans, all trying to get access to the road nearest the curb, which is precisely where you'd need to put the charging points. You've also got some narrow pavements that are already hard to navigate on foot because there's so much street clutter, and charging points could add to that clutter. So one idea for London, certainly inner London, could be to promote electric vehicle car clubs as an alternative to private EV ownership. One car club takes over 20 private cars off the road. And this would also help with the congestion problem that London has. Because, of course, if everybody who currently drives a petrol or diesel car exchanges it for an EV, the London's legendary congestion will just carry on, and the nightmare of the North Circular will just continue forever. And finally, when it comes to air quality, moving to EVs solves half the problem, but not all of the problem, because the most toxic element of air pollution is the particulates which come from tyres and braking, which is why there's going to continue to be a need for really good quality, high frequency public transport to go alongside the EV revolution.
Emma, thank you very much. That's brilliant. I love the image of the electric and all circular. I'm looking forward to that. We're heading in the right direction, but there's lots and lots of questions clearly on the roadmap toward, if I can use that term, on the roadmap towards 2030. Now, what do you out there think? We've got a poll question for you, please, which is going to pop up on the screen very soon. And we would like you to answer that as I'm just going around the table very briefly introducing the panel members, and we'll come back to this poll question later on. Clearly, you're quite an informed audience because you're here for a start, and it'll be interesting to see what you say as opposed to what the great British public have said. So please have a go at that poll question, and I will just briefly introduce the panel and ask them just to wave so you can identify who they are as I go around the room. First of all, Emily Sam from the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles. Emily, hi, good morning. Helen Perry, Nissan Europe. Hi, Helen. Hi. Matteo Dorenzi, Chief Executive BP Pulse. Hi there. Sam Clark, GridServe. Hi, Sam. Good morning. Ken McMiken, Chief Executive at Motorway Services. Hi, good morning. Bridget Phelps, Chair of the Electric Vehicle Association England. I assume there's a Scottish and a Welsh one as well somewhere. Malcolm Wilkinson, Head of Energy and ITS, which I'm not sure what ITS stands for at Highways England. What's ITS, Malcolm? Right, I think he was saying intelligent transport systems. We'll get intelligent video soon as well. And then finally, but certainly not least, Christina Calderato, Head of Transport Strategy and Planning at Transport for London. Good morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining us all. Now, the poll is still underway, I think, so you've still got a few more seconds to answer it. I think though, whilst we're waiting for the Minister to arrive, I will just start the debate if I can, and if that's all right. And I will just ask Helen, the upfront cost is clearly an issue at the moment. A Nissan Leaf, great vehicle, passengers, people love it, costs about £27,000, I think, as I saw from your website this morning. When are we going to see the cost come down? When is there going to be a second-hand market? When will fleet buyers start buying electric en masse, do you think?
Well, I think we actually, as Nissan started selling electric Leaf, we were the first mass market EV 10 years ago. And actually what we've seen is that, the prices of Leaf have actually been going down, particularly in most recent years. I think, this is because the cost of the battery, which is the biggest cost on a car, is reducing. I think the key element to factor in, though, as well, is that it's really important that the governments also support the move towards electrification. So, we're fully supportive of the British government towards the 2030 direction. But what we see in some other markets is very strategic moves to really encourage customers to move to electrification, whether that is through zero VAT or certain government incentives. And I think, the used car market certainly will make electrification much more accessible to customers if they want to make the move. Certainly for us, because we've been in the market now for 10 years, we are seeing, the used cars come through, and it's very interesting to customers that want to make the move and cannot make the stretch to a brand new car.
Okay, and so I don't want you to say a date, but when do you think the prices will kind of start to really come down such that it's just not a barrier anymore?
I think, it depends on the customer at the end of the day and what their budget is. I think that what we need to look at is not just the cost of the car. One of the box pops that was spoken about is also around the total cost of ownership. Because for sure, with an electric car, there's less to go wrong on the car. So actual servicing costs are lower. And of course, you've got the added benefit that the charging is cheaper than actually filling up the car with petrol. So actually, over a period, of a couple of years, it is actually, we can clearly demonstrate that it's actually cheaper to move to an electric car versus an ICE car, a petrol or diesel car.
Right. Bridget, do people think in total cost terms, do you think, as consumers, or is it just really the check that you're writing there and then?
Well, I think a lot of consumers will be looking at leasing their cars, and actually, there's some evidence that leasing actually is competitive, and therefore that this isn't necessarily such a barrier. And we think that people should be encouraged to look at leasing deals and actually see over the period of time that they might be doing that, because then the running costs become more clear and apparent, and those savings. So most people actually do use leasing to get their cars. So actually, it isn't such a barrier. And I think that Helen's right in saying that actually the evidence is there, and we need to share it more broadly, I think, across the whole sector. But to show people that the running costs are really savings are significant.
Brilliant. Sam, GridServe, you've got an interesting business model, don't you? Because you bridge both supply of electricity and the supply of the vehicles. Is that right?
Yes, we do. And good morning, everybody. I thank you for reaching out to me on this one. I think it's a really interesting topic. And I'd just like to say that I think electric vehicles are very much affordable today. And I appreciate that the capital value or capital upfront cost is higher. But in 2019, there were 2.3 million vehicles registered in the UK, and 70% of them were leased. So it's absolutely important that we look at a total cost of ownership model for everybody, and the education thereof that says that actually through it on a leased basis, which the majority of people are now leasing their vehicles, it is a more affordable option on the basis that you must include your fuel or electricity costs per month, as well as the cost of that lease. So that's a piece of education that we're very strong and very keen on trying to educate and demonstrate, that when you look at those two fundamentals, and then as Helen said, things like maintenance, etc. as well, which obviously makes a material effect. Even though the capital cost of vehicles is higher on a total cost of ownership per month, you may very well find that it's already cheaper. And that doesn't even take into consideration if it's a company car, for example, whereby the benefit in kind tax, at least for another month now, is 0 and only goes up to 1% in April, relative to 20-30% for a similar equivalent vehicle. So there's lots and lots of reasons why it's affordable now.
Brilliant. I think we'll come back to this among other topics later on, but the Minister, Rachel Mclean, is now here with us. I'm very pleased to hear that. Please, as the Minister is talking, she will take a couple of questions afterwards, so please, audience, think of questions. If we can't put them to the Minister, we will certainly put them to the panel afterwards. So I would very much like to introduce Rachel Mclean. Minister, thank you very much for taking the time this morning.
Well, good morning. I hope everything is working and you can see and hear me okay. I think this is like literally the third sort of new kind of streaming platform I've used already this morning. So it's been a bit of a whirlwind, but it's very nice to join you. And thank you very much for inviting me to the webinar. So I'm obviously delighted, as I'm sure everybody is, that we are beginning to turn the corner on our fight against coronavirus, with 20 million people already vaccinated and millions more getting their jab next week. Every week, including me next week. That's what I'm actually thinking of. It's the top of my mind. We can start to rebuild our economy post-pandemic, but returning to the old normal isn't an option. Coronavirus has affected our lives beyond what most of us would have imagined 12 months ago, accelerating those pre-existing trends of people's relationship with travel and the environment. People will return to the skies, but they will expect more fuel-efficient planes. They'll reboard our trains, but they will expect an even more electrified network. And they'll take to the roads, but expect upgrades to cater for more active travel. Because before we even heard of COVID, we were facing another global crisis. As part of the biggest poll ever conducted on the subject earlier this year, nearly 2/3 of the world's population now believe climate change is a global emergency. So while it's right that we focus on the COVID response, we cannot let up on our other commitments. Notably, our ambition to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, the first major economy to make such a pledge, to protect the planet's health and our own through cleaner air. And obviously that's why I'm here today. We have reduced carbon emissions significantly over the past 30 years, but transport is still the largest contributor to greenhouse gases. Cars and vans make up around 1/5 of the UK's total emissions, so the transition to electric vehicles will be crucial to achieving that 2050 target. And we've underlined that commitment to our commitment to that transition by ending the sale of new petrol and diesel cars and vans by 2030, 10 years earlier than planned, and mandating 100% zero emissions from the tailpipe by 2035. Last year, the government announced a £2.8 billion package to support the industry and consumers make the switch to EVs and to support the rollout of UK-wide charging infrastructure. That includes substantial grants available for plug-in vehicles, such as £582 million to reduce the sticker price of zero and ultra-low emissions vehicles for consumers. It includes a major electric vehicle infrastructure programme underway worth £1.3 billion for charge points across our motorways and A roads, as well as ensuring small businesses and those living in rented accommodation can apply for funding to install charge points in more accessible locations. The government and industry working together have supported the installation of nearly 21,000 publicly available charging points, including 3,900 rapid devices. That's one of the largest networks in Europe. And statistics show that we're pushing at an open door. Since 2010, the number of zero or ultra-low emissions vehicles has increased from 9,000 to over 450,000 on Britain's roads, with a trebling of market share last year. Jaguar Land Rover, Nissan, Volvo and Ford have already made significant commitments to go electric by 2030. And these commitments show the growing levels of confidence that consumers have in making the switch to an electric vehicle. We in government will work with these companies and more to harness the economic opportunities of EVs, creating jobs right across the UK. But we don't pretend to have all the answers. And if we are to reach our targets, we need to collaborate across government, between industry and stakeholders across the whole network. And where there are barriers to early adoption, we need you to tell us. That's why we're consulting on how to make the electric vehicle driver experience as hassle-free as possible. It means helping consumers to easily locate charge points, reassuring them that the network is reliable and supporting them to pay quickly and simply. In short, how do we keep on building that consumer confidence? The consultation closes on the 10th of April, with a response expected later this year. And we've worked hard with industry to raise awareness about the benefits of switching to an EV. Our Go Ultra Low campaign has been normalising electric vehicles and busting myths for more than 6 years, using consumer-focused messaging, for instance, around the remarkably low running costs, which I could hear the panel discussing before I came on the call. And since its inception, the campaign has helped increase the number of EVs on the roads by over 1,000%. We're also helping local authorities to design policies that incentivise take-up. So my department's introduction of green number plates is one example of how we're making it easier for zero emission cars to be visually identified. So EV drivers will benefit from potential local authority initiatives such as cheaper parking or cost-free entry into zero emission zones. And I'm pleased that the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles continues our support for research and innovation into battery, electric and hydrogen vehicles. And the more we see electric vehicles on the roads, the more attractive they'll seem to new buyers. It's a virtuous, carbon-free cycle. So we need government and industry working together to make the case loudly and proudly. But before I finish, let me just reiterate the point I made earlier. As we turn the corner on this pandemic, we have an opportunity to build back better and greener in a more sustainable way, and leveraging changing public attitudes to transport and the environment. Electric vehicles are quite simply critical to the 2050 target, and I'm hugely optimistic that the UK can become a global leader, not just in the EV market, but the decarbonisation of our transport industry more widely. So thank you very much.
Minister, thank you. That's a really compelling vision. That's great. And our research shows that people understand something is changing in 2030, but they don't quite see how we're going to get there. What is government's role in reassuring people about the stages to help build that confidence? Or is it just going to be a kind of drip, drip, the cars will get cheaper, the charging will get better, don't worry about it?
So Anthony, I think government has a clear role to play because we do need to set out the framework and the policy choices and the government investment that we're putting in. The public will start to see a lot more from us. Firstly, you'll be seeing the Transport Decarbonisation Plan coming out in the spring. That's nearly ready to be published, so people will be able to see a lot more detail of our thinking of how we decarbonise the entire sector. And as well as that, we are going to be working with industry again very closely in terms of how do we actually make that transition for industry to that 2030 and 2035 date. What does that actually mean in terms of the specific types of vehicles? So there is a lot more work for us to do, but 2030 is still quite a long way away. We know that when I speak to people, they want to see as much certainty as possible, as soon as possible. And we fully understand that, which is why we have come forward with these ambitious dates. Some would say ambitious, but I believe they're achievable, a long way ahead of actually introducing them, because we know we need time to do that work, to take the public with us and get the infrastructure ready.
Great. Question from Hannah Pierce in the audience. Minister, do you think that point of sale information should cover the true lifetime cost of the EV to give a fair comparison with fossil fueled cars?
Yes, I do, and already, the industry and the dealerships are already doing a great job on this. And with our help, there is some sort of DFT and government support to enable them to sort of produce that information in a reliable way. And I mentioned earlier the advertising, government-funded advertising campaign that we have been running, which is the Go Ultra Low campaign, which is very much focused on getting those messages over to people that actually it can be cheaper in the long run to run an electric vehicle, because depending on how far you're going and where you're going and what your kind of setup is at home, obviously you're not paying for the fossil fuel at the pump.
Great, thank you. Question from David Winterbourne in the audience. Will the government be introducing greater incentives to help people buy electric cars to get over the kind of early adopter hump? Norway is often cited. They're using their oil money, ironically, to get everyone in Norway into electric cars, which is interesting. But will you be introducing incentives on purchase?
We already have them. We have had incentives on purchase of electric vehicles for a long time, and they are working. That's why we are seeing such a massive uptake of electric vehicles, because people are benefiting from the upfront purchase, the plug-in car grant, the grant to actually install the charge point at home. The company car tax regime is, I think, probably the most generous one in the world. As well as that, all the investment that's going into the infrastructure, whether it's off-street or for people that don't have their own parking, local authorities have got the money to install infrastructure, at people's houses, at railway stations and so on. So I think people are starting to see that. And we've got a major piece of work coming on stream around the charging infrastructure and the motorway service network, which is a vital piece of the jigsaw, which we know we need to do more on. And that's also something that we're actively working on now.
Great. In the context of the recharging network, do you expect the private sector to provide 95% of this, or do you think the government's going to have to mandate, actually, we need a certain socket at that place, sorry, here's the money, put it in? Is it government or is it private?
We have to work together with the industry. So, for example, there are already private companies coming into this market very successfully. We've got the likes of GridServe, for example, solar-powered charging infrastructure at forecourts, and we want to see more of that. But we know we need to set out the framework about how it will all work together. There's clearly a huge amount of work to do behind the scenes to get the DNOs and the electricity grid and issues around way leaves and so on and so forth ready for this. But we are working very closely with all the partners, some of whom I can see on this call, which is fantastic, to get that in the right place so that investment can flow in. But look, we know there's a massive amount of interest from industry and finance. That's why we're now focusing on things like the green investment bond and green finance, so that we can start to draw even more private investment into this space, because they will reap the benefits ultimately, and so will consumers and so will the environment. So it's a massive win-win.
Great. And Minister, the the petrol fuel network grew up quite sort of organically, so to speak. But with the electric charging network, we've got a chance to do things differently. What's your message to the industry about people with disabilities and how they're going to be catered for? Because some of this kit is quite clunky, some of it's quite heavy, and some people will just find it difficult to use. I mean, what's your message there?
It is, and that's absolutely right. It's a vital point, and also, I did a podcast just the other day with Ginny Buckley on International Women's Day, actually, and a lot of the questions there were focused around, well, women don't want to go to some dark corners of car parks because they don't feel safe. So that's also a vital part of it. Obviously, not just women, but anybody wants to be charging up their vehicle in a safe environment. So that's why we're doing a consumer experience consultation at the moment, where we are going to be looking at the issues of accessibility. How do people feel? Is it accessible to everybody when they go to charge up their car? It needs to be just the same as basically filling up your car at a petrol station. We want that same experience, or better, for electric vehicle charging. So that work is ongoing now. I encourage anybody who's interested to please feed into our consultation. It's still open.
And Minister, do you think there's a role there for some sort of charter mark type approach? Because there's been considerable success with parking standards over the years, bicycle parking at stations, car parks at railway stations. They have a kind of standard which it's an accreditation they seek to achieve. Is there a role there for that sort of standard?
Well, we do think there is absolutely a role for the government to require certain standards around reliability. What we've said is we expect to have a 99% reliability metric, and we expect charge point operators to start doing all of this voluntarily. But we've also made it very clear that if we are seeing gaps in provision, we won't hesitate to sort of bring in legislation to fix that. But as I say, we're working through this very closely in the consultation at the moment. It's about the reliability, it's about the payment methods as well. We want it to just be as simple to pay as it is to pay for petrol. All of these things need to replicate or be even better than the fossil fuel charging experience, and we need to get there. There are some things we need to change, and that's why we're working closely with industry. But I have to say that the charge point operators are very, very supportive of this. They clearly want to provide a great service. They know they can make money out of it, but we want to work closely with them and the industry and consumers.
Brilliant. Minister, I think we've got you for another minute, so a parting comment, if we may. If I was thinking about buying a new car today, what would be your message to me?
I would say that's a very good idea to buy a new car, to look closely at the range of electric vehicles. Manufacturers are coming out with new models all the time. Prices are kind of starting to drop. You're starting to see more choice and greater ranges all the time. So go and talk to your local dealer. Have a look at all the information that the government is putting out and the dealership network is putting out, and you can buy an electric vehicle with confidence because we are getting the infrastructure ready for you.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's possibly underplayed, I've only driven an electric car once, but it was an absolute revelation. It was so easy to drive, and it was much less stressful, and you weren't clunking around with the gears and all that nonsense. It was just an amazingly smooth experience. I really enjoyed it, and it made me, made you feel good.
I completely agree, and I've had an electric car now for a year, and I have to say that I charge it at home. I've been on holiday, I think, to Wales once in that time, and I could get all the way to Wales. I could charge it when I got there. So it's really not I understand that, of course, we have to deal with these barriers of people's anxiety. But the range now and the capability of these vehicles is fantastic, and it's increasing all the time.
Brilliant. Minister, thank you very much indeed. I'm glad you made it to Wales. That would have been a headline we didn't want to see in this debate, but thank you for that very passionate and articulate setting out of what the government is planning. And it's been really good to have you here this morning, and we hope to talk to you very much more in the future as well. Thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure, Anthony. Thank you for all the work that you're doing, and to everybody that's on the call as well. I really appreciate all the input that you're putting into this important agenda. It's great to see you all.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. See you soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye. Right, let's return to the panel debate. We got lots of good questions there. If somebody said to me, right, here's an electric car, you're going to Scotland tomorrow, I would be terrified, quite frankly, because I wouldn't have a clue how on earth I'm going to get there. I think range anxiety is possibly the wrong phrase for this. It's more a kind of generalised fear about how the whole thing works. Matteo, how are we going to get over this fear of different apps, of different plugs, different payment methods? How are we going to move through this period?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting question. It probably is the question. I think there is a lot of education that needs to be done, and we all have a role into this. It's true that there are still a multitude of apps and different payment methods for chargers, but we also have to remember that as of today, the majority of the DC or rapid and ultra-fast chargers in the UK are enabled for contactless payment. So exactly as you do at the fuel pump today. I don't know the numbers of everyone, but us alone, we have more than 700 units that are between rapid and ultra-fast, where you can just tap and pay, which then will solve that issue. In terms of plugs and sockets, yes, there is still some destandardization, but we see something happening in that space, not very dissimilar to what happened to USB kind of plugs in the past. So, for example, there are manufacturers that in Europe are already abandoning like the CHAdeMO type of socket. So we might see a full migration to CCS, which will bring a high level of standardization. But even if that's not the case, the majority of the chargers, particularly in kind of very hot spots, they're equipped with both sockets or even three sometimes. So it's that shouldn't be an issue really. So the message is, I think all providers are doing a lot of work and the numbers are coming through. I think that we definitely need to do more as an industry to really help and educate the market that these capabilities are actually there.
Okay, fine. So there's some standardization happening, and I won't necessarily need to carry around three plugs with me, three leads with me the whole time in future. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And Ken, you run the services at Exeter. How are you going to allay people's fear that with the great rush to the West Country in the summer, there's not going to be 3-mile long queues as people spend 30 minutes recharging?
Yeah, it's Anthony. Hi, and hi everyone. It's great to be part of the panel today. Look, I think we already have, and going back to 2013, on all our motorway service area sites, a minimum of 2 charges. They currently only get 2 charges per day. The usage is actually very low because the amount of electric cars, if you're looking at pure electric as opposed to hybrid, is 200,000 out of 38.4 million cars in the UK. So the feedback we've had, which we just listened to our customers, has been reliability and making sure that when they arrive at a site, there is a charger there that's available for them, and 2, that it's actually working. You then get into the sort of simplicity of use and so on, and wanting to be able to use contactless, which I think are other requirements that customers have. We've made a commitment that we are going to massively exceed expectations that customers will have for the number of chargers, but also the power of those chargers. So we're setting out, in line with the government's own vision, to get to a minimum of 6 high-powered chargers per site by 2023. We would hope that by the end of this year, we'll actually be almost half of our sites will have 6 high-powered chargers, which is the upgrade. We'll keep the existing 250 kilowatt chargers. And given at the moment we're only getting 2 charges per day, I mean, you've got 6 high-powered chargers, 250 kilowatt chargers, you would expect you're going to have sufficient demand. Our key is plotting at our busiest times the number of vehicles that we're going to need to charge at any one time, and making sure we've got the power supply to our sites to be able to provide that number of chargers.
Yes. And is there a business case for doing this, or are you being charitable?
No, look, the business case is really one for the future. You're putting the investment in now, assuming that there is definitely going to be this move to electric vehicles. The forecasts vary quite wildly, I have to say. So if you look at 2030, I think is a good sort of time period to look at. The number of and the percentage of electric vehicles is anywhere between sort of 9% of the total vehicles to 35%. Now, if you start to get to 35%, that's a third of your customers. I think that becomes quite exciting. And one thing I think that probably gets missed about electric versus internal combustion engine cars is at the moment on motorways, it's a small percentage of people who are actually using petrol stations. I have a feeling that the future is going to mean more people charging when they stop, so long as you make it convenient and you have not only the number of chargers required, but also the high-powered chargers. Because at the moment, to get 100 miles of charge, you'd probably have to wait with a 50 kilowatt charger about sort of 33, 35 minutes.
Right.
And what people really want, and one of the people made the comment in the video earlier, is they don't necessarily want to wait a long time to get that charge. So as you put high-powered chargers in, the wait time is actually going to really reduce.
Right, brilliant. Emily, what does your modelling say about when the kind of tipping point is?
So the tipping point in which part of the tipping point?
Well, in the take-up of electric vehicles and then avoiding the queues, which Ken is obviously keen to avoid.
So I think, as been said, there are a number of models out there and they give slightly different scenarios. I think the key thing for us is making sure that whenever exactly it happens, that we have the infrastructure in there ahead of that need. So making sure that the investment's going in ahead of the crunch point. And we're obviously already seeing that huge uptake in ultra-low EVs and in hybrids generally. And the Minister was talking about the really impressive numbers we're seeing already. So 2020, so 11% of sales being UEVs, which is fantastic in terms of new sales. And in terms of that infrastructure, that's why we're putting focus and the investment in strategic road network and making sure it is there in those motorway service areas, etc. And so that you don't have the crunch that would be the worst case scenario, because obviously that's not good for either existing EV drivers nor for encouraging that confidence that we've been hearing about throughout this in terms of addressing range anxiety, or whichever term you want to use to describe it.
Okay. Malcolm, that's Emily, thank you. Malcolm, obviously range anxiety is, you may not drive over 200 miles very often, but it's that one time a year that you don't want to be put off doing it, isn't it? What's Highways England's approach to this? You don't want people running out of electricity on your roads. What's the plan?
No, and I certainly recognise a lot of the issues that have been raised there. I think we're working closely with OZEV to understand and work out what our role is in delivering the Rapid Charge Fund, because obviously we all need to work together and deliver what we can best deliver. And we have a keen interest in making sure that the MSAs provide a consistent service across the network, because what we want to see is people having safe and efficient and reliable journeys. And if that involves some sort of planned stop because the charging times are going to be 20 minutes, half an hour, well, what can people do in that time to make it an effective part of that journey rather than wasted time? So we're kind of looking at it from a number of different angles, and we'll be working on that as we develop our carbon plan that we're due to publish this summer. So there's an interest in this. We haven't quite defined what our role is yet, but we're keen to work with the MSAs and with OZEV to sort of contribute what we can best.
Okay, thank you. And Christina, the complete flip side of this in a way, London. Charging at home is more difficult for many people. As Emma said earlier, curbside space is an absolute premium and is going to be even more of a premium in the future. What's Transport for London's approach for this? Are you going to drive this on behalf of government?
So, as we said, in London, it's probably some slightly different challenges, particularly looking at some of the range anxiety type issues, though they're obviously still relevant. Through the Mayor's EV Infrastructure Task Force, we looked at trying to answer this question, especially in the kind of next 5 years. What do we think what mix of infrastructure do we think will be needed in London? And we've talked already this morning about rapids and how they are helpful, how they reduce times, how that's going to be important in attracting more uptake. But I think one of the things that we have identified in London is that it is likely for the foreseeable future that we're going to continue to need a mix of different types of chargers, slow, medium and fast chargers, for different types of situations, whether people are charging overnight at home, whether it's about operational fleets and being able to top up quickly throughout the day. So I think we're trying to look across the needs of that piece, and as we've already heard mentioned, there are different models, and we're trying to understand what the likely uptake might be. In terms of rapids, so far TfL have delivered more than 300, which was our target, and we need really private sector to help us with that. But our future model for rapids is hubs. So to make sure that we're kind of catering for the queues and things that people have been talking about as we reach those tipping points, we think particularly for commercial fleets and on strategic routes, we need to move to a hub-based model for rapids. And then it's all about trying to find where the infrastructure will be most utilised. So similarly to the service stations, we have got some chargers, rapid chargers, which are used very few times a day, and we've got some which are very popular and used multiple times a day. And so as the uptake of those vehicles continues, it's trying to understand where the needs will be, where the demands will be met, and where we can get the most back from putting in that infrastructure. But certainly for commercial vehicles, it's about hubs, but more widely, it is considering the range of different needs, users, types of chargers.
And a hub is the new term for a petrol station, is it?
So it's, multiple rapid charging sites in one location.
Yeah. Okay. And do you think electric vehicles are going to be the death of public transport in London?
So I think what's really important when we're talking about a climate emergency and the role of electric vehicles in that is that we don't just talk about everybody switching from having a gas-powered personal metal box that they like to drive around to looking at how we differently power those personal metal boxes. And in fact, what we need to do is think about how we can have a more sustainable transport system. It might be a more pleasurable experience driving an electric vehicle, but it's no more pleasurable sitting in traffic in an electric vehicle than it is in any other type of vehicle. So I think for London, certainly at the heart of the transport strategy is an 80% target for people making trips by walking, cycling, public transport. That's going to be the most sustainable choice. That's going to best support public health. What we want to then do is to make sure that the essential traffic that remains, which includes public transport, there's already been mention of electric buses. We've got a zero emission licensing requirement for our taxis and have over 4,000 zero emission capable taxis now. So the essential traffic that remains, we want to make sure that can be as clean as possible and provide the infrastructure to ensure that that can be electric. But it absolutely doesn't take over from the need of public transport, which is where actually shifting people from car journeys, private vehicle journeys, to more sustainable modes is the single best thing we can do if we're talking about climate change and emissions reduction. Okay, thank you. Just returning to this issue about the time it takes to recharge. I mean, obviously, petrol and diesel give you a big bang for your buck, and you can fill up quickly. Matteo, what's the kind of thinking about how this is going to pan out over the next few years? When will we all be rapid charging?
I don't think we will be all rapid chargers, to be honest. So we believe that customers, and we see in our data that customers want a choice. So of course, for 60% of people in the UK, charging at home is still the best option in terms of a cost and convenience standpoint. For the remaining 40%, there is a mix of use cases. But when we think about rapid and ultra fast charging, we see today that on average, the time spent in the traditional forecourts is around 7 minutes. And today, if you have the right vehicle and you're attached to the right charger, in those 7 minutes, you can add up to 50, 70 miles of your in your battery, which for the vast majority of the drivers is more than enough for the day and sometimes for the week. I think what Christina said before, it's interesting because clearly there is a natural competition between public transport and cars, But I think we believe that the biggest contributor to the cleanup of our streets actually will be the massive adoption of EVs by e-hailing providers, Uber, FreeNow, Get, because these are drivers that do 30, 40,000 miles a year compared to the 8,000 that an average driver in the UK does. So the most important thing is to electrify those fleets. And what those drivers need is exactly what Christina was mentioning before, hubs in the center of London where passengers are, where they can take a small break because it's also required by regulation, and fill them for the rest of the day, which is something that, for example, we are piloting with Uber, with one hub already open in London and a few others yet to come.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And Sam, you've invested a lot in this area. You've got an amazing looking facility at Braintree, a hub, which I'm looking forward to seeing when we can. What's your sense about, the time versus recharge debate and how that's going to affect behaviour?
Yeah, I mean, the location you referred to is our electric forecourt. We will have a level of hubs as well beneath that as well. So that one is just one of over 100 we're planning to build around the UK to facilitate this market. I think Christina made a very good point about hubs and the fact that we need multiple chargers at singular locations to make it practical for people generally, if you don't have access to off-street parking or roadside parking. So yeah, echo a lot of points that Matteo said and also Christina. I think the point that Ken made as well actually was really enlightening to me, that the sort of statistics around the utilization of those motorway services, if it's 2 charges a day today, it may well be 20 in a year's time and 200 after that. The exponential growth of that particular demand is just going to keep going up and up at an exponential rate, undeniably. So it's been mentioned many times already today, the 2030 ban on petrol and diesel, and we're looking at what the status of affairs is today. In between those 2 periods, we've got a dramatic change. And so the demand and the requirements across all these different levels, whether it be on the street, on your driveway, in a hub, at a forecourt, electric forecourt, service station, it's just going to balloon from here. And we've all got a responsibility to provide solutions across all of those different scenarios to support that growth, because the law is changing, and we are where we are today, and we know where we're going to be in 9 years' time, and there's a huge amount of work to do in the meantime.
Brilliant, thank you. Helen, what are your customers saying about all this? The people are actually buying the cars. What are they saying?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think in terms of customers, when we come back to making the swap, obviously it's a big move. We see that when people actually buy an electric car, they need to test drive the car in much more circumstances than perhaps if they just buy an ICE car. But I think once someone has actually done the swap to electrification, they tend to stay. So 70% of people who've bought an electric car will stay with an electric car going forward. Now, coming to the actual usage, because I think it's all about usage of your car. If we look at the usage, most people perhaps start out with their Leaf, for example, as a second car in household, and it very quickly becomes the first car in household. Everyone wants to use it because actually when you're living with it, you realise that you can do most of your day-to-day trips. I mean, I'm a full supporter of making sure that we have the hubs, particularly around the motorways and the A roads, to secure that when the long journeys are happening, there is the fast charging. Obviously, our batteries are also getting bigger, so it allows those long journeys to happen with the area where we'll end up having a range of 500 kilometres. I guess, though, for me, thinking about how cars are used on a day-to-day basis, they are tending to do a relatively short journey, and they are tending to be parked for quite a long time before the person goes home again. So I'm a firm believer that we absolutely have to make sure that the charging is being put in not on the journey, but at the destination points, whether that's in the work or whether it's at the cinema or the supermarket. Because this is where people, the majority of the time the car is parked and the person can go into the office or go and do their shopping or watch the film. And if we are properly kitted out, the car can be, obviously charged at that point. So I think also we need to think about not just how we charge or fill up our cars today, but how we can in future charge our cars, because I think it's quite different to what we have today in terms of.
And are you going to do a Tesla and start installing chargers yourself?
No, I mean, when we first started 10 years ago, obviously we were the first, mass market EV. So we spent a lot of time making sure that we did have charging points in strategic points, making sure our dealer network had chargers which customers could use. Now, honestly, I think, there are many CPOs, charging point operators in place, and we very much firmly believe that it's important that we leave that part to the charging point operators. Of course, what's important to us is to make sure that when customers visit our dealerships, for example, there is the facility to charge their cars. So that's probably our key focus at the moment.
Thank you. And Bridget, do you think there's enough information at point of sale about home charging, about the whole life costs, government grants? Question from Rosemary Williams in the audience.
I think there's a lot of information available out there. And probably at point of sale, what I was going to say to people actually is, if you're at all interested, is go, once we're through this period, hopefully, and dealers open up. The NFDA have the electric vehicle approved scheme. I was going to encourage members of the public who are interested to go and test drive an EV. And through that NFDA scheme, they can find dealers who are very well qualified to explain about EVs, the benefits, how they work, the grants that are available. So I think there's always a need for more information, but I would just encourage people to also, when they go to motorway service areas, to chat to EV drivers, because actually this is almost a community of people who've adopted EVs, who are very keen to talk about their experience and share information. Yes, happy to also encourage people and explain how to get on board, and that it's not so difficult.
NFDA is, sorry, what does that stand for?
The National Federation of Dealers Associations.
Right, thank you very much.
The electric vehicle approved scheme.
Brilliant. Good. Okay, let's change pace slightly. There's some fantastic chat going on in the side. As ever with these webinars, there's like a fringe festival goes on, and there's some amazing information, and we're capturing it all. We've got it all. We've got all the links. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go back to the poll that we asked earlier about the barrier to electric vehicle take-up. What did the audience say, please? Right, what is the biggest barrier to the take-up of fully electric cars? We've got a high upfront cost, followed by having enough charging points and they work, and we're going to come back to that after in a minute. And then we've also got battery range, how long. Hybrids are more attractive, okay, fear of the unknown and other, okay, clear message from the audience there, high upfront cost, having enough working charging points. Thank you very much. And let's go back again and hear a bit more from the public, please. We've got another set of videos just for you to watch, just to set the tone for the next and final part of the panel debate. Thank you.
The driving experience, I find, is much more relaxed, much more sedate.
It's incredibly smooth and incredibly quiet.
It feels like you're driving a really luxury petrol car.
They're brilliant. That's it.
The best thing about it is it's attached to an app. The heating will kick in, and by the time I go out there, I've got a nice warm defrosted car.
When you're sitting in a traffic jam, it's almost relaxing. I'm sure if there was a study that monitors your heart rate, your blood pressure and everything else, there'd be a lot less road rage if everyone did drive EVs.
It does make traditional cars feel, agricultural is the word I would use.
Owning the car for over 6 months, we did realise that we needed to plan our journeys a lot more meticulously to make sure that we were able to get to our destination without running out of charge. And what we found is a lot of the chargers that we were, relying on to get us to the end point were not working. So the charging infrastructure, I'd say, is quite unreliable in my experience.
I often find I get to a charger and I kind of feel like, it's not like, oh, this isn't working. It's more like, oh, this one is working. That's great. Which it shouldn't be like that. And I think that does become problematic for someone like me who can't charge at home.
Would there be 2 or 3 people all wanting to use 1 or 2 charging points? So would it add, half an hour? Great, but an hour and a half.
I've opted out and taken our other car when I had to go, beyond the range.
It's very depressing when you get to a motorway and see 2 lonely-looking chargers that didn't work and like 10 Tesla ones in the corner.
Even though you're waiting for your car to charge, if it's like a long journey, it's really important to take breaks.
Being able to charge at home is a huge advantage.
I mean, it's easy for me to sit here and say that EVs are the future when I've got my own charger in my own house. A few years ago, then I lived in a flat. It would not have been the same thing at all.
Brilliant. We certainly don't want lonely chargers, do we? That would be terrible. Interesting, that juxtaposition between people who love their electric cars, but the chargers don't seem to work. Sometimes the charger's not working. I've seen figures that 1 in 5 on a given day are out of action. Ken, what's going on?
Yeah, look, we get a lot of feedback from customers. You can imagine if you turn up on a motorway and you need to charge and the charge is not working and there's no alternative, it's a problem because you may not have enough charge to get back onto the motorway and to another charge. We run at sort of 97%, which is not where we'd want to be. You heard the minister a moment ago saying 99%. To be honest, you'd really want to be 100% all of the time. But it's a bit like going to a petrol filling station at the moment. Sometimes you'll find a pump is not working or a type of fuel is not available. It's the same problem with chargers. So really what we've got to ensure is we have more chargers. So if one isn't working for whatever reason, there is still the availability of chargers. The problem is if you've only got 2 and neither of them working, there's no alternative. So we are, the problem we have, we believe, with our chargers at the moment is they were sort of almost first generation, put in 2013. They all get replaced by the end of this year, upgraded, and we would expect that 97% to get up to 99 to 100%. So that combined with the number of chargers, I noticed one of the comments made by one of them was about 2 chargers and a large number of Tesla. We open our first new motorway service area in April in Rugby, and that will open with 12 high-powered chargers and 12 Tesla chargers. And I think that's kind of the way forward, is the number of chargers that are available combined with an efficiency and make sure that they are working is the way to go.
Okay. Emily, is the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles content that this pace of progress is all right in terms of the things actually working?
So no is the short answer. You'll have heard, as the Minister said, we're currently consulting on improving reliability. We think that is critical to the driver experience. It's critical to current drivers. It's critical also, as I said before, in terms of building up confidence in EVs more generally, because we know that people's negative experience will influence other people who might otherwise be thinking about EVs, and that's something we need to address. So our evidence suggests at any one time around 1 in 10 charge points aren't operating, and obviously that's not good enough. And some of those will be legacy issues. Sometimes that isn't directly necessarily in the charge point operator's own control, and we understand that, which is why we're putting that 99% target rather than going straight for 100. But clearly 100 is where we all want to get to, and we need to get to as quickly as possible.
Thank you. And Christina, on this point about accessibility, I mean, TfL has been very good on accessibility over the years, very, very vocal about it. What account are you taking of the needs of various people who are going to be charging in future? Christina, you're on mute for some reason. Help. No, still on mute. Right, I will. Christina, just try again. No, you seem to be on mute for some reason. Sorry, we'll come back to you on that point, Christina. Sorry about that. Sam, GridServe, you're installing all these. What account are you taking of accessibility needs of various users?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think one thing which is great about the reliability at the forecourt is we've got 36 chargers. So there's a virtual certainty that we have 100% reliability, because even if one of them failed, we've got 35 others to fall back on, which includes Tesla superchargers as well as AC charging as well. So, and indeed 350 kilowatt chargers too. So that gives us some degree of comfort that we've got a number of different chargers at one location, which creates that level of comfort that the reliability will be sound. Even if we had a huge power cut, we've got 6 megawatt hours of battery storage to prop us up. So I think that's incredibly important, and something we want to make sure is fundamental with everything that we do, because that level of reliability has to be there to give the comfort for the general customers. And in the videos that we just watched, it's clearly the thing on people's minds is that charge anxiety more so than range anxiety now.
Yes. And the question from the audience, from Graham Footer from Disabled Drivers Association, about can chargers be fitted in disabled bays at motorway and other service areas on the strategic road network? Malcolm?
Well, certainly I would have thought that would be a wise thing to do. And when we did our charge point program in road period 1 to plug some of the gaps across the SRN to make sure that 95% of the network was within 20 miles of a charge point. The specification for those parking bays was to ensure accessibility to the charge points. So we were very conscious of that when we put those in, and they were put into car parks where there weren't other services in the vicinity of the SRN. So garden centre car parks and other places that are not just SRN but close to the SRN. So I would have thought that was a sensible idea moving forward.
Yeah, good. Well, we look forward to seeing much more of that. And I don't know if there's anybody from Motability in the audience, but it would be quite interesting to hear Motability who enable the purchase of a huge number of cars on behalf of carers or people living with a disability, and what their attitude to all this is, because their fleet, in a sense, is vast and their buying power is vast. And I wonder when they're going to go electric, or maybe they have done already. I don't know. Christina, are you back with us?
You tell me.
Yes, that's a stupid question, wasn't it? Christina, you are back with us. TfL and accessibility of charge points.
So what I was saying is that the accessibility and inclusion work around moving around London in general obviously needs to encompass, as a strategic transport authority, we have to take the holistic view. So it's about, first of all, making sure that our services are fully accessible, or as accessible as they can be, which we are obviously doing. When we're looking at specifically around charging points, a lot of the feedback we've had from disabled communities and stakeholder groups has been more around the problems around street clutter and accessibility of being able to use the street furniture and being able to use pavements and then being wide enough, and the kind of problem that charge points have presented, if you like. So after one of the actions coming out of the Mayor's task force, EV infrastructure task force, for us was that we produced an EV installation guidance document, which gave local authorities in particular that guidance on how and where we should be putting in infrastructure, different types of infrastructure, what might work well in different settings, how it can work for all users. So though, in terms of installation guidance, we've kind of tried to round that up and make sure that it's available in one place for people, which hopefully helps. And then, of course, we do the same with our own infrastructure, but also working really closely in London, we've set up the London Charge Point Operators Forum. That meets quarterly, and again, that kind of tries to get everybody together to look at these issues in the round, make sure that we have interoperability, that we're accessible, that everybody's taking a consistent approach. Obviously, that needs to work beyond London as well. We need to work nationally and with other cities to make sure that those links are there. But certainly within London, we're trying to take that holistic approach.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And Bridget, how do we deal with hoggers, people who are in recharging bays but just using it as a bit of free parking?
Well, as an association, we recommend maybe leaving a polite note, but above all else being polite, because we don't want to have sort of different rage issues around EVs as opposed to others. So we hope that and encourage, we have an etiquette guide that we will be sending out to members shortly when we launch. Most EV drivers are considerate. Yes, so basically you have to, it's almost more annoying, I think, when it's a petrol or an ICE car parked in an EV spot. And I kind of hope that there may be the motorway service areas or the government guidance, there can be something that gives a bit more power to encourage solutions to that, so that it doesn't become an area of frustration.
Okay, thank you very much. Returning to the issue of power, there's quite a lot of discussion in the chat about wireless or inductive charging, and I think I've seen somewhere, maybe it's in Sweden or somewhere, there's a bus that can get power from the road to keep it going enough. Matteo, is this the future? Are we just tinkering with kind of interim technology at the moment?
Well, we see two types of experiments happening in that space. So one is the example that I think you are referring to, where we have kind of a small section of a road with almost an electrified rail in the middle, where the truck can take the power from. Being honest, we don't see a possible rollout of that technology. The infrastructural cost will be just too high and unjustifiable from an economical standpoint. And the other example is the wireless, where there is actually an example happening in the UK with the pilot. I don't remember exactly where, probably in Nottingham or in York, for a taxi rank with that happening. Being frank, in our model, we don't see that as well as something that we will see in the near future. The main barrier being a strong need for standardization of the batteries across different car manufacturers to allow that to happen. And although, for example, could be a great opportunity for people with less some disabilities or other issues in that space, we believe more honestly that the battery swap could be a big thing of the near future. We see strong examples happening in China and in other parts of the world where car manufacturers are developing their own battery swap technologies. And we see literally, cars that can change a battery in a matter of seconds. And the benefit of that is the user experience, but also the fact that those batteries could be charged overnight or when the electricity, the power is not expensive, which then will give great economies of scale.
I think that's really interesting, Matteo. It's very interesting from the point of view of accessibility, that you don't have to have all these clunky, heavy wires. And secondly, Ken, your problem about the M5 services, instead of having hundreds of static chargers, why can't you just have mobile battery units and just swap people's batteries around? They've got a new battery and off they go.
Yeah, well, you won't be surprised to hear we're also looking into that as a possibility for the future. I mean, we think it's a bit like, if you think phones go back 20 years and the life of your battery and how often you had to charge your phone. We think, look, we're a great believer that as a race, we will find better ways in the future of extending battery life, of actually being able to charge faster. But in the meantime, we're looking at all sorts of alternatives like battery swaps. We're also looking at whether it's just electric or will hydrogen play a part, because for us at Motorway Services, we're not just looking at cars, we're looking at HGV vehicles, we're looking at buses who move people around the country outside of COVID-19. The key thing for me is about this speed of being able to charge. And at the moment, we'll put in a minimum of 6 on our sites by 2023 of the 150 to 350 kilowatt chargers. A 350 kilowatt charge to give you 100 miles of charge should take you less than 5 minutes. That's when you're starting to get into, I think, the realms of what's it like to fill up with fuel in an ICE car compared to what it could be like in the future to charge an electric car. So we're working really to think about how do you increase the speed at which you charge, and what are the alternatives ways you might be able to do that. The car manufacturers need to help, I think, and I think they're already doing a lot of work on this around range that you can get from your charge and your battery. But we're pretty optimistic. We think because the demand is going to be there, we'll have to find the solutions, and the solutions work for drivers.
Brilliant. Christina, tell us about the 69 bus, and then Malcolm, tell us about your plans for installing inductive strips up motorways, please.
Yeah, so I'll just cover this very quickly, that we have trialled wireless charging with the bus network, and so it was three specially kind of range extended buses. They did have bigger batteries than normal, but looking at how we were able to do that, and by plugging in overnight and running those buses out of the depot in the morning, I think we found that we could run 80% of those that bus route using power from the grid. So definitely continuing to look at how we can move this forward. Is just the trials give us valuable information which we can then take forward.
Interesting. Malcolm.
So we looked at inductive charging probably about 5 or 6 years ago and concluded then that it wasn't an economic option. Now, I know this technology is moving forward all the time. I think there's a trial going on in Israel at the moment that they're building. So we're closely watching this space on not just inductive charging, but all other forms of electric road systems as well. The challenge is, do we need electric road systems, or actually will batteries and hydrogen enable all vehicles to use the SRN effectively? And if that's the electric road system, which one? Because it's not a situation where you could have multiple technologies. There needs to be a kind of definitive, we're going to go for this one type of approach, and we're not there yet because there's a lot of challenges around anything you can put in the carriageway.
And Helen and Bridget, do you think consumers are going to get into battery swapping?
Again, from my side, it's something that we have looked at historically, but it's not an area that we are exploring for sure. When we've got, for example, our older Leaf, certainly in the US, they are actually able to swap the 30 kilowatt battery for 40 kilowatt battery. So if the customer wants to change their battery size, they have the capability to do that. But that is something that you would have to do at your dealership, and certainly isn't something that is done in a matter of minutes. And at the moment, that's something that we're not exploring.
So we might not have seen the end of dealerships or garages quite yet. Bridget, when are you going to swap? When are you going to swap your battery?
I don't know about that. I don't think at the moment it's going to be a major issue. And I guess I would just like, as we're nearing the end of this webinar, just to emphasize for people who are thinking about EVs that this consumer charging consultation that's underway at the moment, Emily's made a plea for people to respond. I would just wanted to say this is I think from many of our points of view, we see it as the major opportunity to address the problems that have been talked about reliability. We very much welcome the 99% commitment, the 24-hour helplines for all people accessing charge points, a transparent price per kilowatt hour, and the investment that's going in also to charge points. So we think that hopefully this consultation and then the regulations that result will really take away quite a lot of the issues that people perceive as being problems.
Great. Yes, thank you, Bridget. That's really helpful. And I mean, today has all been about trying to get the user view in front of those of you who are making the big decisions about this whole area. And Emily, I think I'd like to come to you as we start to draw to a close. Choice is good for consumers. The private sector is heavily involved in this area, which is great. They're investing money. Matteo, Helen, everyone's putting money into this. How are we going to navigate this interesting mobile phone contract sort of period where you've got perhaps electricity providers, you've got manufacturers selling electricity as part of the car, you've got a multiplicity of places and bundles of how you could pay. Can I sell my electricity back from my battery into the grid? It's a very exciting era. How are you going to steer us through this?
Wow, that's a huge question. But it is, I agree, it's a very important question. And it's one that shows just how complex the EV space is, doesn't it? Because it's not just about transport or the energy sector, but it's how those two interface. And that's a lot of what in OZEV we look at for government, trying to how we bring about those. I would say that so the actual energy bit, there's lots of work going on there in terms of what's needed for giving people choice in a transparent way about how they can do those energy bundles. And we're already seeing movement in energy companies in terms of the offerings and pricing tariffs that are available for people to do that. And I think that we also, on the more direct driver experience, in terms of actually making sure people have access to the data so that they know where they can charge and what the pricing is, and they can make those informed decisions themselves. That's all very important to it as well. Some of the earlier conversation that was going on around the role of smart and flexibility in this and what the benefits EVs can bring to the energy system, so not just taking demand off, but also flexibility back. That's all part of the picture. So we had the energy white paper that came out recently from Phase, Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, set out some of our ambitions in that space. And then, as the Minister alluded to, we've got shortly coming up our transport decarbonisation plan later this year. So I think those two together will be important markers in terms of the government's commitment and where it's intending to take this work.
Brilliant. That's really, really helpful. Right. Now, I just want one comment, please, from each panel member as we start to close. What's the one thing you vote for to see you want to see change in the next 2 years to get more people moving towards electric cars? Malcolm.
I think what I've sort of been inspired by this morning is the EV users and how positive they are about their experiences. And we had a lot of success with our Try Before You Buy van schemes across the country. So it'd be good if that was an opportunity on a wider scale for people to try an electric vehicle for a short period of time before they decide to buy them. And that may sort of stimulate a much bigger uptake more quickly.
Yes, I think there's actually an electric vehicle centre at Milton Keynes, isn't there, where you can go and try stuff out, which I'm also going to go and try out, which sounds fun. Sam, what do you want to see change?
I think I would probably say a greater increase in governmental education to the public in terms of what EVs is all about, but with a greater feed from the private sector in terms of what that education piece looks like. There's a lot of miscommunication or misunderstood elements of this, and we need to educate the 99% not driving EVs right now into how to do this effectively, and try and myth bust along the way.
Okay, Helen, one thing.
Yeah, I think drawing comparisons with some of the other markets around Europe, I really think the government needs to be a bit more strategic around government incentives or bonus malus schemes towards not just the business driver, but also the private consumer to be able to access electric vehicles. So that would probably be my rally call.
Okay, brilliant. Christina.
I'd like to see, I think, more of the close and collaborative working across the industry, which we've seen happen, lots of different initiatives, our task force, other work that's happened. But I think it makes a real difference when we think holistically about that customer offer and how we can work together to have something that's really coherent, interoperable, and that serves people's needs.
Brilliant. Matteo.
Well, I'm probably echoing what Sam, Christina, and others have already said. For me, it's I'm welcoming more and more and better awareness of the progress that has been done already, the facilities that are available. We are at the beginning of a very exciting journey. We shouldn't be shy or neglect the fact that there is a lot of work to be done around reliability, old infrastructure or first generation infrastructure. So we shouldn't shy away from it. But equally, we are one of the most progressive countries in Europe in that sense. So we should really bring that level of education and awareness to the public to accelerate further on the adoption, which on the other end will bring more investments and even better service for everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you. Ken.
Yeah, I agree very much with Sam's comment, and a number of others have made the same. But education, probably supported via the government, I think is pretty key. The one thing I would say is, look, I've been watching all of the comments coming through on the chat. If we listen to the early adopters, they'll tell us what we need to do. And actually, if we fix the issues they are highlighting, that will actually give us a platform to communicate out to non-EV drivers why they should actually make that switch, because it's convincing people that make that switch now, and based on having listened to and responded to the comments that are being raised by early adopters, because they know what's good and equally what's not good about ownership of an EV at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you. Emily, you're charged by government with making all this happen.
So I'm going to say, it echoes what I think most people have said so far already, actually, and it is about that communicating the benefits and the positivity that we've already seen amongst EV drivers. But that requires collaboration from all of us, both on this call and more widely, to do that education and communication piece, because we're all part of solving this problem.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Bridget, it's quite proper the users have the last view. My image of electric cars for years was governed by that Top Gear episode, which was absolutely hilarious when they tried to recharge using a cable across a river. I seem to remember. Do we need a kind of electric version of Top Gear to shift everybody into thinking differently about electric?
Well, I would say partly it's absolutely there and fully charged, actually. And if you don't know fully charged, which has been out there spreading the message about.
Bridget, we just lost you. Sorry, we will come back to you, Bridget, by the end. You've frozen, unfortunately. Anyway.
The point I'd like to make is just to say about local authorities and the importance of people in local communities, particularly who haven't got access to their own drives, actually contacting their local authorities and getting engaged in how charge points can be rolled out on a cost-effective basis across the country. So the levelling up aspect there around charge point provision to enable everybody to enjoy the benefits.
Okay, brilliant. Right, we're drawing to a close. I think it's been fantastic this morning. Thank you very much to our panelists. You've been absolutely great. Thank you very much to the audience and the energy you've put into the chat. We'll be recycling it and sending it back to the grid later. It's been great, isn't it? After so many months of quite grim news about various things, we're talking about something really positive. We're talking about the future, and everyone's bought into the long-term aim. I think that's fantastic. We've got obvious issues around cost. We've got obvious issues around fear, and we need, I think, a better roadmap of how we're getting to 2030 at some point to help push people. But there's a lot of energy behind this. All the points raised in the chat, we will try and get back to you and talk to you. My colleague Lee is in charge of that. And as you would expect from Transport Focus and from London Travel Watch, we're leaving you with a goodie bag. Unfortunately, it's a virtual one as we can't have a physical conference. Our latest report has now popped up on the screen. Please download it. Please spread it. Please spread the good news. And afterwards, you will also be asked to fill in a survey form about this webinar. We want to make this even better next time. And I've got a sense we'll be coming back to this subject quite soon because it really, really matters for the planet and for all of us human beings. So thank you very much indeed. We're finishing on time as befits a transport organisation. And thank you very much indeed. And look forward to seeing you all at the hub for a bit of recharging. Thank you. Goodbye.